I personally think Terence Crawford is mentally stronger than Canelo Alvarez. I mean, time in and time out, we see that level of intensity come from Terence Crawford, especially when it comes to his mindset. This dude doesn't know how to lose. We look at Canelo Alvarez, and with all due respect, Canelo's one of my favorite fighters to watch, but as of recent, he hasn't been because of his low output. I feel like Canelo can definitely do more for his fans, within the last few performances he's had, and he just hasn't done it. It just seems like he's coming to get paid, and he doesn't really have a sense of urgency to prove anything, and that's okay because he has this mindset of, making a lot of money, being the businessman that he is. He's taken that Floyd Mayweather blueprint, but a lot of his fans want to see him try harder and put some more effort in it to give, the Mexican fans and a lot of the fight fans something to be entertained with. Canelo just has been fighting fights and letting it go to the distance when I think there are more, steps that he could take to ultimately make it a better fight, make it more exciting. Like with William Skull, Edgar Berlanga, I think in all of those fights, it's fair to say that Canelo could have stepped on the gas more in all of those fights. If you're the cash cow of the sport, sometimes you got to prove and show out, to prove to the fans why you're the cash cow. But Canelo, like I said, as of recent, hasn't done that. Then you have a guy like Terence Crawford, where, he just got pretty amped up, and Canelo did too. They both got pretty fired up at the press conferences, which was good to see because, I feel like they've been very friendly, prior to the more recent press conferences. So to see them, going at it, some bad blood kind of brewing a little bit, I like to see it. I like to see that for Terence Crawford, and I like to see that for Canelo Alvarez. But time in and time out, we've seen Terence Crawford with that level of intensity. And you look at the fight with Shawn Porter, you look at the fight with Gamboa, Mean Machine, he's dealt with adversity and came back. I feel like people don't understand, with Shawn Porter specifically, it was such a great fight and performance from Terence Crawford because that was one of the best versions of Shawn Porter we've ever seen. And still, Terence Crawford found out that he was losing that fight and turned it on and went on to stop Shawn Porter. And that just shows, that level of intensity. You don't see that in the sport of boxing too often. And, Canelo, as good as he is, he's lost before, like I said. And of course, Floyd and Bivol, losing to them, there's nothing to be ashamed of there. But the facts are the facts. One's never lost. One doesn't really know how to lose up until this point, and Canelo ultimately has lost 2 times. So there's something in that mindset of Canelo where, ultimately losing isn't the end of the world. Losing is obviously not the desired outcome for Canelo Alvarez, but it's happened to him more than once. And you got a guy like Crawford who I just can't see him losing. This dude hates losing. He's going to do everything in his power to ensure that he doesn't lose. We saw the Canelo fight with Bivol. We saw Canelo fight with Floyd. You could visibly tell the direction of the fight wasn't going in Canelo's favor in both the Bivol and the Floyd Mayweather fight. Even in the latter ends of the fight, of both fights, did you see Canelo really sell out? Did you see Canelo really put everything on the line? No. And, everybody says, oh, he's not the same fighter that he was against Floyd. He learned a lot from Floyd. Look what happened with Bivol. Obviously, stylistically, that was a tough matchup for him. Maybe he shouldn't have taken that fight, but he did dare to be great. But at the end of the day, it was an L. Like Terence Crawford said, I agree. Every time that Canelo Alvarez had to step up, he lost. With Crawford, Shawn Porter was a big name, Gamboa was a big name, Benavidez was a big name, and then of course the Earl Spence fight was a big name. Terence had to step up for all those fights, undefeated still. Every time he was doubted, he got the job done. At welterweight, stopped everybody, every single fighter at 147. That's impressive, and that's when Shawn Porter was the toughest guy in the division, and you had other fighters. Earl Spence Jr. wasn't necessarily the toughest, but he was the best fundamentally sound fighter there. He was pound for pound #1, tied with Terence Crawford, and Crawford just washes him. So if you ask me, Bud has a mindset that's just different from Canelo Alvarez, and I'm not saying they're both, alpha males. They're both guys that don't want to lose. They're trying to beat that other man so badly, in the ring, and ultimately they know it's do or die for both of them. But like I said, history tends to repeat itself. With Canelo Alvarez losing before and Terence Crawford never losing, how am I going to pick the guy that has never lost? If it was just your average 147 pounder coming up to 68, then I'd be like, oh yeah, obviously Canelo's too big. But you got to understand, the IQ and the reflexes, the skills, the intangibles. I don't see Bud losing to Canelo. You know, I think it's still a close fight, but everything as of recent has been telling me, you know, Canelo's slowing down. Canelo's output hasn't been great. Now, I've always said that Canelo could get more excited for this fight, and that's how he pulls out a vintage version of Canelo where he's faster, throws more punches, and can potentially land that big shot to put Crawford to sleep. But it's a big if. And, you know, for Crawford, it's also a matter of if he can handle the power, but also can Canelo even catch Crawford to land that punch, because Crawford's going to be fast in there. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next boxing video. Peace.